do now is try and tie this up in a package. And my feeling is, I remember years ago hearing, I think it was in a philosophy class at CSU, that a good idea should simplify and clarify. Now, typically what happens when in workshops and things like that, even though we like the ideas and everything, typically there's a sense of either being overwhelmed or being overcomplicated or wondering, yeah, those are good ideas, but where's the handle? In fact, I remember the first time I did a kind of thing like this at the plant in in Loveland. I thought the one thing I want to do is to have a way for people to have a handle. If I choose to do this, this is what I do. And I got all through, and the lady who invited me, she was from the personnel department down there, she said, well, Paul, that all sounds good, but where do you get started? And I thought that's what I'd done the whole time, is showing them where to get started. So I want to simplify and clarify because, first of all, I've tried to present you with the idea that there's a physiological component, there's a psychological component. There is, we talked about how the neuron chains, how habit patterns develop through neuron change and so on and so forth. And what I want to do now is do a simplification. And in fact, this is probably the most difficult part of this workshop because when I'm through, it is so simple that people don't think it's an answer. In fact, a few years ago, I did this one time, and I talked to the group, and I told them, I said, I'm going to give you the answer. Got it? I'm going to give you the answer. Now, when I'm through, you're going to say, well, Paul, when are you going to give us the answer? Well, what happened is the very next week, some of us went to a workshop over in Y camp over on the western slope, and one of the folks from the group said to me, after we listened to a lecture, no, it was a videotape over there, he said, now, Paul, when we get back, would you please explain to us what we just saw? And I said, I just did last Sunday. I told you that the answer is so simple. And he kind of blushed because he couldn't figure out how he could have missed it. So having told you that, I'm going to proceed to do that now. One of the things that we don't clearly understand is how our bodies and our brain, which is part of the body, how it responds to thinking. And I gave you that article. Did you get some copies made of that article? That article makes the statement that it is our job to figure out what, not how. And therein lies a powerful concept, and I want to show you what I mean, and maybe I can introduce it best by showing you this. I made this as a handout too. I don't typically do handouts because my experience with myself is of all the dozens and dozens of workshops I have gone to and the notes I've taken and the handouts I've gotten, I can't remember a one where I went back and reviewed it. Anybody understand what I'm saying? So I don't see why we should go through the process. But other people, once in a while, you meet somebody who really does. They're list makers, I guess, and they do it. So one of the things that we did in our classes for drinking driving offenders was to make up, we didn't present it like this. We presented it in a different format. But in my office door, I have two charts. One of them, the life profile, and underneath it, the death profile. And I want to show you what's the way we did this. We'd have, see, when you're teaching these classes for drinking driving offenders, you often have a class full of angry people. They're not glad to be there. They feel it's unfair, and so on and so forth. So we'd quite often show them this life profile, which is made up of things being non-judgmental, compassionate, appreciative, considerate, responsible, trustworthy, forgiving, open, honest, caring, genuine, patient, trusting, and freeing. And we'd show this to, and some of the people would say, that's kind of Pollyannish, isn't it? I'd say, yeah, it is. So I'd say to them, okay, then build your relationships on this. Close-minded, judgmental, inconsiderate, resentful, vengeful, resistant, dishonest, angry, blaming, hateful, violent, critical, controlling, manipulative. Do you know, I have never, no matter how angry, I have never, ever met anyone who doesn't recognize immediately this doesn't work. I am absolutely amazed at how people try to relate to each other with critical. I better not tell you who this is, but there's a guy here in town who owns 2 different businesses. I used to be on the board at Partners, and he was on the board there too. And he told me one time, he says, I believe in patting my employees on the back all year long, but at the annual evaluation, no. They get to find out what's wrong. Well, guess how his employees felt when it come to annual evaluations. So, we all, and isn't it amazing that with our kids and with our bosses and with our spouses or whoever it might be, that we actually think that you will get better if I keep pointing out to you what's wrong with you. Really, let's be honest here for a minute. Does it work? What do you do when your weaknesses are pointed out to you? How many of you respond by saying, oh, well then I'm going to correct that right away? I don't know of anybody who does that. What we do is we hide it better, or we justify it, or we so on and so forth. So here's what I'd like to do then. That's the reason I don't know what word to use other than I use the word perfect. Our culture, generally speaking, shies away from the word perfect, but I am going to go ahead and use it because I want us to free ourselves up enough to imagine what it would be like to have a perfect work situation. Now, the word perfect needs to be understood in this light. Generally speaking, when we think of perfect, we think of it being some line of achievement where nobody makes any mistakes. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about perfect. I'm talking about this. This means that whatever we experience, we profit from it so that the next step can be taken. I probably said this 2 weeks ago, that if I say my daughter is a perfect 12-year-old, does that mean she doesn't make mistakes? No, it means that she is doing typically what 12-year-olds doing, which is learning to grow up. In every work situation, we're all in that process of learning how to make it go better. And if we do you know what the Hawthorne effect is? Who said that? Well, that's where it started. It started I think it was in Lockheed out in California. Is that where I thought it was the name of the experimenter. Hawthorne, Illinois, huh? Oh, I just learned something. Okay. What happened was they were experimenting. This is early in psychological experimentation along this line. They were trying to see how light would affect production in the plant. And they found out, of course, that if they provided more light, that production went up. The problem was that it went up in the other areas too. And so that's where they developed the idea of a blind study, because they found out the minute you and I feel like we're in on things, our production goes up. If you don't feel like you make a difference, or that you feel like you've got to do this to earn your paycheck, or so on and so forth, then their production takes on pretty much of a straight line level. But the minute you get the sense that you're in on things, The Hog Foundation of Texas, by the way, I better spell it. There might have been 2 G's, I don't remember for sure, but that was the name of a governor of Texas, and it was also, there's one of the jokes in Texas. You're from Dallas? There was jokes went around all the time that they had 2 daughters, Ima and Ura, and what I've been told is that the Ima was correct, the Ura was added. But at any rate, the Hog Foundation financed a study to find out how supervisors thought line employees, what they considered to be the most important thing. There were 10 different things that were ranked according to their importance, and then they had the employees rank for themselves. And at that time, this is 40-some years ago now, maybe longer than that, maybe it's close to 50 years ago, they found out that the supervisors ranked the importance of things in almost exactly the opposite order that what the line employees did. For example, the only one I remember real clearly is that employees put a sense of being in on things as number 1. Supervisors ranked it, I think, as I remember right, it was 8th. What do you think supervisors put it at the top? What? Yeah, no, not for, remember, it's what they think you think is most important. Probably. Anybody else? Pay. Yeah, they thought wages would be important. Of course, you see, this is what Henry Ford thought. That's where production lines came in. And, of course, Hewlett-Packard was one of those companies that, I don't know what they're doing now, but they were one of those who realized that to do one thing all day long and have the thing move on where you never get a sense of what you made was very hard on morale. Is that how to... It's very difficult on morale because you don't have a sense of your own accomplishment. So there's a tendency for it to do that, and well, I better not, we're going to get stuck in another area here. But my feeling is that employees have a lot more power over this than what they think they do. However, here's what the way I'd like to approach that. First of all, take the now, where you are right now. If you were to describe your now right now, what kind of words would you put in here?
Now for right here, or
Work, your work situation right now. How would you, just give me words, and if you were going to use phrases, don't use more than 2 or 3 words. How would you describe it? Repetitive. Learning process? Now, is that your own personal feeling? It's a learning process. Okay. Now, I want to make sure this is not what you wish it was. This is what you feel it is. Okay, good. Okay, someone else. How would you describe it? Unstable. Next. Trapped. Okay. Is that it? Now, we're going to go over here. Now, remember something. I think we talked about this. I think I talked about it in terms of married couples, but very few people, at least in a married situation, can describe what it is they want if they were describing the perfect condition. So let's go over here and describe the perfect condition. And let's don't cut it back because it seems impossible. So how would you describe it? Say it again. Oh, good. In other words, good communication, right? Now, does that mean it's poor communication here? Lack of communication? What? Between you and management, or what? Within the group. Yeah, okay. Lack of communication within the group, okay. Includes management. Okay, now let's describe good communication. You know, you could spend a whole workshop on what that consists of, because one of the things I've learned is people think that if you finish sentences, you're communicating. Just amazing to me how many people, parents say this to me all the time. They say, well, he can talk to me anytime he wants to. I remember a son told me one time, he says, you can't talk to my dad. And I knew his dad, and I thought he was easy to talk to. And I said, what do you mean you can't talk to your dad? Well, he says, just like he said, at the beginning of the quarter, I made up my mind, for the first time in my life, I'm going to bring home at least a B on my report card. And of all subjects, he chose science. He happened to like the science teacher. And he did. He brought home a B in science. And his dad took one look at the report card and he says, well, now that's more like it. Now let's see some of these other grades come up. He couldn't quite enjoy the B, could he? So, and another father, or maybe it was the same one, I said, your son feels like he can't talk to you. And he says, what does he mean? He can talk to me anytime he wants to. Can't you see yourself running to talk to him? See, good communication has an awful lot to do with tone of voice, with curiosity, with respect, with all of those things. Good communication. Okay, what else? Say it again.
A feeling that each person feels that they're respected by everybody.
Oh, respectful. Respected, maybe we should put. Yeah, let's put it that way. Mutual. Incidentally, let me share something with you. Several years ago, we got a new superintendent of schools who had made up his mind that he was going to get input from the teachers. And so he put out a questionnaire to all the teachers in the district. And when the questionnaires come back, and I read some of them myself because I was in the office there, they struck me as being one of three things. Very picayunish, you know. Here we're going to learn how to do the school system, and here's someone complaining because the drinking fountain is too far down the hall. Or they were things that I wish we had parents who were more willing to support their kids in school. Well, that's a pretty good one, but it isn't quite telling you how to set up the school system to do that. So there were all kinds of things. And the new superintendent was so disgusted with these, he threw them all in the waste paper basket and ignored them. What was wrong with that picture? He did what? Absolutely. That's one thing. What else? Absolutely. He might have looked at his own questionnaire. What else? How many good ideas can you expect from 350 teachers? One or five or something like that? Did you expect 350? If you're brainstorming, how many of the ideas that you bring up with brainstorming do you expect to be productive? See, now, R.G. Letourneau, he got upset at Caterpillar And so he started his own company. And R.G. Letourneau was, a lot of heavy equipment was built by R.G. They said that he was one of the most creative minds that ever around. He got, every day he was full of ideas. Out of all of the ideas, he'd have 100 ideas. One of them would make the company money. The other 99 were unproductive ideas. But the one was so good that it paid for all the losses on the other 99. You think that's true of you people, your ideas? Do they deserve looking at then? And I think that's where this comes in at. You give your ideas and they do that. What else would be the perfect situation? Let's put it like this. More flexibility. Are you talking time or work or what? Across the board, huh? What else? By the way, I want to ease your minds here a little bit. When we start describing the perfect situation, it's tough, isn't it? It's really tough. Let's say the women folks in here, supposing you're going to describe to me the perfect man. Could you list, you know what most people do when they start describing? Well, he wouldn't be, and they start out immediately telling me what he wouldn't be. But to define what it is that you really want is tough. Another thing that this is said to me over and over and over again. People say, well, I met this guy, and he was pretty nice. Now, he didn't have everything, but you can't expect all that. I mean, when we start describing perfect, it's almost impossible to do that without cutting it down to what we call realistic size. And what I'm suggesting here we do, that we cut ourselves away from that cutting it down and allow ourselves to think what would perfect be like. I think I told you this, that the police used to say to me, they'd say, Paul, you think you're going to win on all of them, don't you? Did I tell you this last week? And I, 2 weeks ago, and I said, yeah. If I have to lose, isn't once enough? Why do I have to lose in my imagination just thinking about it? Isn't once enough? So, what's this perfect situation got in it?
Responsible for themselves.
I don't know of a better way to say it. Truly responsible. It'd be another word. Let's put it down here, though, even though maybe it's an explanation of this. You know what I do in a lot of situations like this when we try to develop trust between different functioning bodies, and somebody does something, instead of discussing the issue, instead of discussing what this person did, what you did, or what you didn't do, instead of that, when this happens, see, you put it in the third person. When this happens, does the trust level go up or down between us? What surprises me so often, and that's one of the things that when you start, listen here, I suspect that that's one of the words. Am I right? You'd like to be trusted? Kids the most conflicted kids would tell me they'd like their parents to trust them. Is that any different for us? You'd like to be trusted with what? What is it you want them to trust you with? Judgment. Trust your judgment. Yeah, trust, I'm not going to write, trust to profit from mistakes. How's that? That you have enough sense. By the way, doesn't this go with this? If this were here, wouldn't you automatically have that? Now, you're getting the idea here, and I want to take this a little further, take it into the meat of it here then. Here's what I'm suggesting, and I may lose you all on this. This is where we may part company. If you read that article that I handed out last time, he says it is up to us to figure out what, not how. Now, in my experience with individuals coming into my office, and I ask them to describe, tell me what it will be like when it's working. In fact, with couples, I do this over and over again. Before you tell me what's wrong, tell me what it will be like when it's working. Now, I need to tell you that very few people can do this, especially when it comes to couples. They know what they don't like. They have a hard time figuring out what it would be like to have what they want. Now, but here's what I've noticed in the office. I say, when they figure out what it's like here and what it would take, well, what would it take? Instead of describing this, what they usually take, well, it'd take a better job, it'd take a better boss, it would take more money, and they start putting out all the things that it would take here. And what I'm telling you is if you try to fill in all these details about how to get from here to here, you'll create more doubt than you do faith or trust in your mind. I've sat in on a number of sales meetings where sales managers are trying to get their salesmen to dream, to get their dreams out there, get a picture in their mind. And then what they will do is, typically what they will do is, I was sat over in Greeley in a sales meeting one time when some of the guys that were practically crawling out of poverty were saying within a year's time they're going to live in a $500 house, be driving a Mercedes-Benz car, and their sales output was going to be such and such and such, so they could go to Hawaii anytime they wanted to. I mean, we got all these dreams, and typically, if we use the dream of perfection, if we start putting in the detail, we create more doubt than we do faith. So, let me share with you my own experience on this, because it was 42 years ago that I really hit the end of my own rope. As I look back on it, I don't understand why I didn't contemplate suicide. I didn't, and I don't know why I didn't. I can't give those out. Well, we'll use that in a different way. I didn't contemplate suicide, but I recognized that somehow or other, my efforts to change, my efforts to use a different neuron chain, all seemed fruitless. And I remember thinking very clearly to myself that if I can't find a way to make this work, I will live my life out as a failure. That's, instead of suicide, that's the way I thought of it. I thought of living my life out as a failure. And then I ran across the little booklet by James Allen called As a Man Thinketh. Now, how many of you are acquainted with that tiny little booklet, As a Man Thinketh? This book, by the way, just absolutely had a profound effect on me, and I'll tell you why. It's the second chapter in that little booklet, and the title of that chapter is The Mind is Like a Garden. Well, I got to thinking about this, and it says that the gardener is responsible for what grows in the garden. And I wasn't so dumb that I couldn't figure out that my experience of life was the crop from my garden. You know, does that follow there? So I kept working my way back. Now, you understand that for everything that we have, there's a creator, and then the manifestation of that creation. You see, this chair, think about this for a moment. Plato would have said that this chair has the essence of chairness. Now, what makes that a chair? What? That's where it started, but what makes this manifestation a chair? What qualities does it have that makes us call it chair? Pardon? You sit in it. It accommodates the hinges of the body. Now, what if we had what? What if we had something that accommodated several hinges along here, all side by side? What would we call it? That'd be one name for it. What? A bench, or a couch, or a pew, or a divan, or we'd give it some other name, but it has the quality of chairness, excepting that it accommodates more than one. Now, when the creator of this chair set this up, it was a perfect chair in his mind. Wasn't it? Now, there's always a lowering of standards as you go from the creator to the created. However, folks, we love our creations. We love our creations, and we're attached to them. And so when we create something, whether it's a situation, for example, when I was first appointed chief of probation, that was when the state went from a county operation to a state operation. So all the chiefs around the state would meet, and we did a lot of work together. And one of them is to taking a lot of personality tests. And I've got to tell you this, that my personality tests all show that I like horizontal relationships. I don't like to be in a superior relationship with people. I like to have an exchange of ideas. I think the people who work, shall we say, under me, 9 times out of 10 make me look good. The judge used to compliment me on this. He'd tell me, boy, Paul, he'd tell me what a good job I'm doing, and I'd say to him, yeah, but you got to understand that I've got some people that are very creative, and they make me look good. And then he'd say, but you picked them. See, I got the credit anyway. And that was only a half-truth about me picking them. But anyway, they picked me as much as I picked them. But anyway, now back to Plato. Everything has an essence that becomes a manifestation. Now, how does it happen? Well, when this person looked at chairs and one thing and another, I imagine he said, I'll bet you I can make a chair that will be more comfortable sit in a workshop than what we've had. Those steel chairs, you remember? This was made since steel chairs. He said, I'll bet you I can make a better chair. And so he held that consciousness. He let it mature in his mind until it became clear to him what his job was. When his job became clear, then what he did here was through inspiration, not because somebody held a gun to his head. I'll tell you this, another thing from the probation office. When I was appointed chief there, I had no background in probation. I didn't know what a chief was supposed to do. And I'll show you how dumb I was. I didn't think of going to another probation office and visit it to see how they did it. I never thought of that. I sat down and I decided, what do I do? What is it? I saw the forms. By the way, my training consisted of, the judge came in and he told the clerk, he said, show Paul where the forms are. I mean, that was my training to be chief of probation. So I looked at the forms, and I figured that by looking at those forms, I could get some kind of idea what the judge wanted. And so I began to create an office around those concepts. You know what? I became known as an innovative chief. Even the Joint Budget Committee sent their staff up to visit our office to see what was done. I don't know who told them. They told me that they said, you guys get more done with fewer people than anybody in the state. Made me look awfully good, didn't it? I was this innovative. And then when they left, they said, would you say this would be a good model for the state, for all the offices? I said, no. And they couldn't believe their ears. They said, why not? I said, because, I said, everybody in this office is so convinced that they can make a difference, that they can make things go better. They're working 40, not 40, but 50 and 60 and sometimes 65 hours a week to make it be. If you make that the standard, look what you're doing. They're just proving to you that it can be done. That's all they're doing. Now you make that the standard, you're cutting them off at the pass. But I'll tell you what, everybody in that office felt like they were in on making this. And we didn't set out to make this the best probation office. That isn't what we had in mind. We felt we could help. We started out with kids. Later on it became adults. But our idea was to really make a difference with kids. And there was such a profound sense of that. They come up, you know, one of the ideas that I told the staff one time, I said, the best probation tool we've got is jobs. I said, here's what I told them. I said, money in the pocket that mom gave you, $5 in your pocket that mom gave you is more freedom than no money, isn't it? But $5 in your pocket that you earned is more freedom than $5 in the pocket that mom gave you. I had a guy, that's all I said. I had a guy in the office that started what became known as the Pickle, Operation Pickle. He went out and found a farmer to give us a couple acres of land because we could work more hours of kids on a pickle farm without using power machinery than any other crop around here. And we started out here close to the interstate, and then before Poudre Valley Hospital enlarged, we had an acre of ground just to the east of Poudre Valley Hospital, and the patients would watch these kids working in the pickles, the cucumber patches out there, and the commissioners got all that, because the commissioners helped finance it. The commissioners discovered they had a wonderful political bonanza flowing to them because this was wonderful seeing these juvenile delinquents working on a farm, hoeing and watering pickles, cucumbers. And everybody was excited, and people, I can't tell you all the things, and we got known all over the state for Operation Pickle. Now, what I'm getting at here is that to simplify this whole thing, if you were to sit down and start allowing it, it is not going to mature in a day or a week. And by the way, none of you would describe it the same. What a perfect situation is here. But if you begin to put your attention, then when you see what is going on right now, every time you see unstable or feel unstable, they say, yeah, I'm very clear on what I don't want, and immediately fix your attention over here, because here's what happens. This is where the neuron chain comes in. Because every time you fix your attention, you only have to tilt the scale from 47 to 51% to make a difference. Literally, I'm talking literally. You only have to change your attention from here to here for a few more minutes a day. And what you do is you set in motions, and sometimes you're sitting around drinking coffee, or you wake up in the middle of the night, or you're just working at some job. You know, at my house, I've gotten so excited about this because I'm the one that takes care of the outside. My son-in-law and my grandson, they hate the thing, and I don't mind at all because that's my recreation. I work out there. And every time I run across something that I don't like, that bugs me, I recognize immediately, here's a chance for me to create something. And so I start looking. I got a project going on now. See, I'm not very good at engineering, and I'm trying to get water to flow freely through a hose so that the same amount of water comes out of each outlet along the line to water my apple trees. And I started out, I just hooked it up. Man, it only watered the first 3 trees. And then I put a long stem on this, and so the water had to rise up higher here. I didn't want to spend the money to buy little switches so I can close valves. I may have to do that. I haven't figured it out yet. But here's something that isn't working. I should be discouraged, right? But here's a chance to be creative. I'd like to show you, if I had a chance, I'd take you out there and show you this stuff. I have a guy who, I built a greenhouse. It was terrible. It didn't work at all. And a friend of mine who knew more about it than I did, I told him, I said, come on out and look at my greenhouse. And he came out and looked at it, and he looked it all over. And it was terrible. He said to me, he said, you know what the best thing about this is? I said, what? He says, you did it. The rest of it just talked about it. Now, my feeling is that if we hold this dream in mind, what happens is that pretty soon the knowing within you begins to rise to the surface, and you begin to get ideas about what to do this. Then when you act on it, you act out of inspiration, not out of obligation. And there's an enormous difference. Did I tell you about how I decided I wasn't lazy? Playing volleyball? See, this was a powerful moment for me because I spent so much time thinking of myself as lazy. Guess what I would do then? If I define myself as lazy, or as incompetent, or as put upon, or as victimized, then all of my energy goes into supporting that position. But if I begin to hold this dream, then pretty soon the ideas come up. Helen just can't get over some of the stuff I've done. I've often said, when we first moved to Loveland, I rented a house on Lake Loveland, right on the lake. And we were broke. I had no money. And I said, I'm not going to live on the lake and not enjoy it. I can't buy a boat. So I had a neighbor who had some old junky tongue and groove lumber that he wanted to get rid of. So he gave it to me because I knew that you can paint old lumber and make it look good. And I built what I called a floating patio. The only engineering fact I had was that water weighs 8 pounds to the gallon. So I knew if I could I went to a local cleaning shop, and they gave me their barrels that they got soap in. And I mounted them, I built this deck, and I stuck the barrels under there. And I had wonderful buoyancy, but no stability. I'd put my son over here, and a son over there, and my daughter here, and a daughter here, and Helen here, and me here. And then we'd take our little dog along, and that dog could run from this corner to the other, and he'd start tilting. And pretty soon we were all scooting off the deck. And then I got down, oh, that's why they make pontoons that stick out, beyond to stabilize the buoyancy. So I rebuilt it. And then it got so popular around town among youth groups that I had to build it bigger, so I bought some 55-gallon drums, and then I took these smaller ones and put overload pontoons so that when the crowd would all go to one side, you'd go down a ways, and then the overloads would take over. And the Recreation Commission in Loveland told me I had the safest craft on the lake. What happened to it is a boy drowned off it. A group borrowed it from Eton, and they played all afternoon, did their study. They had planned their whole year's programs on it, and as they were coming in, he had taken off his life jacket. He was supposed to be the best swimmer in the group, and we used to drag a rope behind it and just play in the water, and he did, and all of a sudden he just went down and never came up for 2 weeks. But they used my deck, my floating patio, to dive for 2 weeks looking for him. And by then it was so torn up I never rebuilt it again. But by the way, well, I can get all into that. What I'm after here is that I've discovered, I am so convinced that each of us by nature are creative. And when we set ourselves free by this process here, then the ideas begin to flow, and we come up with ideas on how to do this and do that and the next thing. And first thing you know, we're all with that profound sense of being in on something. And I'm convinced that it's harder to do in a large organization than it is in a smaller one. I'm very much aware of that. But I'm also aware of that gives you opportunity. What if this department decided that they were going to come to work each day with an idea, what it would be like? And give yourself time to let this mature. Don't try and do it in one, in one day or anything like that. Maybe never even have a meeting. But each day bring something to work that says, what would this be like if it was just absolutely an exciting place? You know what? This is what I've come to like so much. What I've enjoyed so much is going from having to go to work to feeling like going to work is the same as staying home. It's just a different activity. And to think that, and I know something, when you feel you're being creative. See, I used to think that only belonged to a few people. It was juvenile delinquents that taught me that creativity is so fundamental to our nature that if we can't be creative, we do vandalism and stuff like that. It's the same energy misdirected. There's something in us that says we must be creative. When somebody puts you in a routine situation where you drive 14 tacks in the back of an automobile every day for 8 hours a day, it drives you crazy. So, what would it be like in your present situation without making a big spiel with your supervisor? Say, what can we do to make our jobs fun? I like the word fun. Someone said to me the other day, well, I make a big difference between fun and pleasant. Pleasant to me has depth. Fun is frivolous. Well, I can't make that distinction. I just like fun. I decided years ago I'm not going to live anymore. So I'll tell you what I started doing. This is what I talked about last time. I started creating my day in the morning, making up my mind that I have a lot to do with how I experience my day, and I'm going to lay it out for myself. And I don't look at it in terms of what it's going to contain. I look at it as to in what context I'm going to hold it. So one of the things that's absolutely a must for me is life is fun. I'm going to find every which way I can to do it, knowing that it's a growth process. And here's where a lot of people get tripped up. They decide they're going to do this, and it doesn't work out that way. Remember from my diagrams, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks before an idea matures. Typically, bamboo takes 15 to 30 years to germinate. Sedum takes 3 or 4 days. But garden crops generally take 8 to 10 days. Remember a guy he works here in this plant. Or at least he used to. I don't know if he's still here or not. But he's a guy that did some wonderful things, but he never gave himself credit for it. I mean, it was just incredible how he gave everybody credit for everything he did, including me. Let me tell you this story. One night about midnight, I got a call from this guy's ex-wife. He said, he's over here and he's threatening to commit suicide. So I got up and dressed and went over to the house where they were. He was not supposed to be. They were separated. In fact, they were divorced, but he was over there. And I go in there and here he's laying on the floor with just his pants on. And I thought he was passed out. And so I'd known him for a number of years, so I just grabbed him by the belt, and I says, let's give him a name. Let's call him Jack. I think I won't forget. Just call him Jack. So I pulled on his belt, and I said, come on, Jack. I said, let's go home. And here he was awake. He says, I just want to die. Well, this apartment where they were was right across the road from a dam into a lake. And so I tugged on him again. I said, well, you can die at home. And I pulled on him again, and he rolled over very slowly and kind of got up on his knees. And all of a sudden, he was totally alert. And he dashed for the door, grabbed it, and jerked it out. And before I realized that I had better do something, he was across the lawn and on his way to this dam. And I took out after him, and he beat me there by a long shot. He was quite a few years younger than I am. And when I got to the edge of the water, he was way out in the lake already. And it was midnight, no moon. Now, what do? Do I go in after him? I'm not a good swimmer. Never had life-saving lessons. I happen to know this was the 4th time he had attempted suicide, and I thought to myself, maybe it's time he succeeds. So I went back up on the dam, and his ex-wife was standing out in the yard, and I said to her, call the police and tell them to bring a boat. Well, the police and the fire department came, and they put up a great big bank of lights out there. And guess what? They didn't go in after him. Here's his head sticking up. I thought I was watching somebody drown. I mean, they didn't go in either. And pretty soon he swam back to shore. And they took him to the hospital, and the mental health took over from there. And so the next day I decided, I'm just going to go by where he works. This is before he was here. This is long before he came to work here. And I went over there, and here he's at work. So I walked up to him, and I said, hi, Jack. And he said, hi. I said, you know what happened last night? He says, no, do you? I said, yeah. And then he backed off, and he says, did I blow it? And I said, yeah. Oh, God. He says, can I come and see you? And I said, sure. So he got permission to come, and he come over to my house, and I explained to him how when we constantly hold our worthlessness in mind, we begin to create a crop of worthlessness until life isn't worth living. And I said, there's only one person can change this, and that's you. You can change the way you perceive. You can start telling yourself that you're worth something. And he says, you're right, you're right. So next morning he comes to my house, and he says, it doesn't work. I said, what doesn't work? He says, that stuff you told me yesterday about changing your thought. I said, Jack, you know what you did? I said, you went out and planted your radishes yesterday, and today you dug them up to see if they were growing. I said, when you plant radishes, how long is it that it looks like nothing is happening? By the way, when you plant a garden, when do you start going out there to see if it's come up? Absolutely. Certainly there's one wild seed there that's going to shoot up, Never. That's the reason I put up on the board 2 to 3 weeks. When you make a decision to change like that and you hold this, and then if it doesn't work, what do you do? He said, well, it doesn't work. But if it's a law of the universe, it always works for everybody, every time. And if it isn't working, it's because you're not in obedience to that law. So you have to search some more. But the point is, you hold this in consciousness. That doesn't... See, everybody says you can't get anything until you act. Well, there may be some truth to that, but if you act before inspiration, if you act on something before you have the inspiration to know what to act on, your work is generally counterproductive. So you hold it in consciousness until the inspiration strikes, then it isn't... Why? It's just like I said playing volleyball. Why can I play so hard if I'm so lazy? I worked hard. I suffered pain playing volleyball. I never once thought about it being a nasty job. So, when we allow ourselves, and it's like a friend of mine says so often, everybody says, well, you've got to be realistic. And my friend says, no, never be realistic. Then you only create what is. If you keep saying this is the way it is, then you keep creating. If it's unstable, if you keep saying it's unstable, sure it is. I'm not denying the truth of that, but that's not what you want to keep creating is instability or unstableness. You want to say, what would it be like if it was stable? Picture it to me. And by the way, then you've got to open your mind to possibilities of things being quite different. I remember one time I went to Helen and I said to her, Helen, I just have a sense that there's change coming down the road for us. I said, let's be alert and see what this is. Well, within a week, a committee came to see me offering me another job. It was a committee, it was a very sensitive situation. So the committee was an unofficial committee with official sanction. They come and invited me to this other job. And it seemed so impossible to me. I said, I can't do that. No matter how much I want to, I can't do that in the same town where I'm doing this. And they left, and Helen says, Paul, I don't get it. You ask me to be alert and sensitive because something's coming down the pike, and then it comes, and because it doesn't come from the direction you think it should, you cut it off. And I knew she was right. I had to open up to it. Listen, your inner knowing has all kinds of resources that you don't know anything about in your conscious mind. I'm so convinced of that. When I see people, I went to a music director. He was Mr. Music in Jackson, Mississippi, and we knew his cousins, so he was directing the Messiah one year down in Jackson, Mississippi, and we were weekend guests at his house. And so while we were visiting with him, I said, who do you find goes the furthest in music in all of your experience? And he got very serious, and he says, you know, Paul, it's very seldom those who are most talented. It seems to be those who know they don't have so much talent, and therefore they have to put more into it. That has convinced me that all of us have a creative potential that most of us have only barely touched.
You said, have a creative potential. We're always creating something. It just may not be what we really want.
Yes.
And you handed out that paper last week on from power to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 2 weeks ago. And it wasn't very many days after that, one of our people wanted to take the test for being certified in our area. And I was trying to help this person get ready for it. And I spent hours and hours trying to give this person all the knowledge I had, trying to point out all the pitfalls that I knew would be on the test that might trip this person up, trying to make it as easy as possible. And the person missed 10, and it was over what was allowed. And the first comment the person made when she found out she missed 10 was, I knew I was going to miss 10. I knew I was going to miss 10. And I said, wow, you're really powerful. And then I discovered when we looked back at the test that she had changed enough answers that were right in the first place, so she had exactly 10 wrong.
Oh, man. Do you know, I have learned for myself that it's been the hardest thing in the world is to trust my own intuition. You look at trust as being one of the elements here. You know, the first thing we have to do is trust our own intuition. See, to me, intuition was something that women had and a few other people, but I was devoid of. You know who convinced me that I'm intuitive? My wife had to convince me that I was intuitive. And then when some other people told me that, it was hard for me to accept because I'd always thought of myself as this left-brain, logical, accumulative thinker, that went from logical conclusion to logical conclusion. And then to discover that I have intuition was quite a revelation to me. I'm convinced now that everybody does. It's a matter of learning to listen to that intuitive sense and to trust it. Because even when I trust it, see, we're getting impulses all the time, and that's the one thing we talk about. What kind of a person is an impulsive person? Hasn't it always been used as a negative in our lives? But impulses is the way our guidance comes to us. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have to test our guidance and see if it is so to speak. But the point is that let's give value to that intuitive sense we have. And when we do this, the thing that I've noticed too is that it gets better and better as time goes on. That is, when we once begin to trust it and trust it more and more, that then we get more of it. And it's kind of fun to watch it emerge, especially when we don't attach life and death value to our mistakes, when we make mistakes to make it seem like, oh, I blew it. You remember I talked to you about the perfect basketball player? What does the perfect basketball player do when he misses? Give me that ball. And the imperfect ones, I just knew I couldn't. right along this line, Linda, I've had so many people, I try to open this field up to them and then say, well, I just can't do that. I just can't do that. And I said, listen to what you just said. Listen to what you just said. I can't do that. I said, what if that thought becomes a crop in your life? What will you have? I had one lady, I've known this lady for 20 years. She ran away from an abusive husband in Ohio. She brought 6 kids with her. She did a very bold, daring thing. She left in the middle of the night with a U-Haul trailer with a grand piano loaded in there somehow or other.
Oh my God.
Because she loved music. And she left in the middle of the night while he was at work, and she come out here. And I never saw anybody who sabotaged their own success over and over again. And one time I tried, I don't know, it was 6 or 7 years that off and on, I'd been trying to get her going. And one day she said to me, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She said, Paul, do you think I might be sabotaging my own success? And the tears started rolling down her cheeks, and I felt like they should be on mine too, because oh yes, because everything her kids just bled her white because she felt so sorry for him. They'd grown up with this abusive husband. Now he's back in Ohio. He isn't a part of their lives yet, but everything that went wrong was because of this abusive husband. Well, when are they going to take responsibility for what's going on now? You know. And by the way, she finally, about a year and a half ago, was driving her son's car out here in Weld County, and she has no memory of what happened, but she rolled over in a ditch, fractured her skull, ended up in the hospital. We thought she was going to die. I went over there, and all the kids were gathered around. And boy, something has happened. She calls us now. I've signed notes for her. I've wrote checks to her. I've done everything I could think of, even the stuff that my intuition told me was wrong, trying to give this gal a boost. Since her fractured skull, she's never asked us for anything but two things. One of them, she asked for transportation to the doctor in Greeley one time. And all of her other questions is, well, what kind of birds are these? She knows I'm a bird watcher. She says, what kind of bird has these colorations? What do you feed this kind of a bird to get them to stay around? That's the only kind of questions I get anymore. Financially, I can't see that she's much better off than she was before. She never asks for anything again. It often takes that kind of catastrophic confrontation before we actually change the way we think. But I don't think it's necessary. I think the universe just slaps us on the head and says, listen to what's going on. Listen to your speech. She was in my office one day, and she'd come in and do this litany on it. Well, these are one of those days. This is when everything goes wrong. And I said, listen to what you're saying. Is this what you want to create in your life? How many times do we say, oh, this is one of those days? Today I'm a victim, you know. And then we set it up, and then we're absolutely convinced that that's the way it is. I don't think we're that helpless. I don't think we're that much at the mercy. And I know our time is up. So thank you exceedingly much for a wonderful, attentive audience. I've enjoyed this. I hope you have. Here's some copies. I got some stuff on the back that I shouldn't be handing out here. But these, what I haven't decided. I don't even know what's on there. Be very still and allow every new experience to take place in your life without any resistance whatsoever. You do not have to do anything. You simply have to be and let things happen. Ellen Caddy, Footprints on the Path. How do you like that? Okay. Anyway, you're welcome to this. I'll tell you what I didn't do, and I've been a little bit cautious about doing it because I don't want to impose some of my lifestyle on you, but I have a routine I go through every morning in the shower to create my day, and I think everybody needs to learn to do that. Create that day before you face the issues of the day. Okay? Remember, the marbles take the shape of the container you choose. Again, I'm through.
Everybody, those of you